Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Truma is Perek Yud, Halacha Dalid and Halacha Hey. And in the Dafim, we're learning today Daf Tzadik Dalid, and we are all the way on top of the Amid in the beginning of the Mishnah. So for just as a few words of introduction, we will continue today in both Mishnayos, both Halacha Dalid and Halacha Hey, to learn applications of the rule Tam Ke'ikr. We're moving away from Reach. We're going back to Tam Ke'ikr. And somehow connected, but not the same, with the Machloikas Tanoim that we had between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Shimon, whether Nois and Tam Livgam is Mutter, which is the Halacha, Rabbi Shimon, or Rabbi Meir, however you'll understand Rabbi Meir, similar to that. We're going to be learning today regarding two items that are min b'minoi. This is significant. Min b'minoi, the imparting of flavor from one onto the other, is not l'shvach and not l'vgam. It's neutral. It's the same taste. And I think b'chlal, just like when we learn smicha, same thing over here, it's so important, the first thing to ask, is it min b'minoi, min b'she'enoi minoi? I think this is a foundational question. Everything we'll be learning today will be about min b'minoi. I want to say something else. Regarding min b'minoi by Truma, we already know the rule, that if you have the ratio of 100 to 1, then the item itself is nullified. Everything that we will be learning today is where you don't have that ratio. The item itself is not nullified, but the focus won't be on the item, the focus won't be on the mixture, the focus will be whether the taste of the prohibited, in our case, Truma, whether it's going to go into, whether it's going to be absorbed by the non-Truma, rendering it forbidden to non-Kohanim. First example will be olives and olives. We're going to be talking about olives that are being pickled. So you have Truma olives, non-Truma olives. There is going to be a differentiation whether, and the question is whether the chulin olives will allow to be eaten. In other words, you know how to separate them later. So it's not about, you don't know whether it's, you know that the olive that you removed from the pickling barrel, that's chulin, but it was being pickled together with truma. Now, when you pickle things together, don't forget that they are sitting in, we can call it brine, we can call it salt water. And let's just say the following, that just like heat causes items to both impart and to absorb flavor, that's why when you cook things together, there's a much bigger problem whether if they were not cooked together. Same thing is if two items are soaking together, that's called kavush. Halachically, we paskin that unless there's something sharp, by non-sharp, 24 hours is when we apply the rule of kavush kemevushel. Also, maliach kiroiseach. In other words, if the item that's laying together with another item is laying in something very sharp, or very salty, I'm adding the word very. How do we apply it? That's a good question for Rabbanim. Then you don't even need the 24 hours. Our Mishnah is going to be speaking about pickling. We're going to start with pickling olives together. So there is a brine or a salt water that has some sharpness to it. The problem we'll have, the bigger problem that we will have with the whole sugya of pickling things together is that since kavush kemevushel, so the Mishnah is going to say, well, it depends. If the chulin olives are broken, are crushed, they are already opened, they absorb. If they're whole, in certain circumstances, they won't absorb. I want you to know that when it comes to cooking items together, we make no such difference. That means if we were to take chulin olives and truma olives and cook them together, vadai, the tam of the truma olives will be absorbed in the chulin olives, even though it's a neutral taste. And a non-kohen will not be allowed to eat it. Our Mishnah is speaking about pickling together. So if the girsa of the Mishnah is the way we have it, we're going to see that kavush kemevushel is not kemevushel mamish, because we will make such a differentiation. We're going to be also speaking about having grasshoppers, kosher and non-kosher together. I want you to know that the juices that leave a grasshopper when they're being pickled, when they're being soaked, biblically is not a problem. Just like we used the words yesterday of zeya, I know it could mean different things in different contexts. Zeya means sweat. on the biblical level, think about it. You have a non-kosher grasshopper. If when you're preserving it or pickling it, I know that we don't eat it, we don't know what that means. Okay, but when we pickle grasshoppers, the salt water brine extracts juice. That juice is so insignificant. Biblically, it's completely mutter. Rabbinically, according to some Tanoim, it's a problem. But since it's only a problem in the Rabbanan, it's a lesser problem. So again, the question will be whether you can have now the kosher grasshoppers, whether they absorbed the rabbinically prohibited juices. That's going to be, same thing will be with fish. You have kosher fish and non-kosher fish. That's going to be all of the topics of today, that they were being pickled together. Whether they are whole fish, whether they are not whole fish. Again, the problem will always be, really the problem is, number one, whether the brine is permitted. And then the question will be whether the kosher fish became prohibited. All based on the premise that the taste of one goes into the other, even though they share the same taste. We're speaking about two items that halachically are considered of the same type. We're not talking about bittul of the item itself because you don't have the ratio of 100 to 1. We're not worried about meduma in all of these cases because when after they were pickled to the point that you wanted to get them to, you can separate the kosher from the non-kosher. So you know that you're not eating the non-kosher fish. You're eating the kosher fish. And the question is, did it absorb enough taste? And we're going to have a very interesting rule throughout. And this is how it works. That when you put two items at the same time, if they are whole, and you put them into pickling juice, to brine, salt water, whatever they put in there, the first thing that happens, they absorb at the same time. The next thing that happens, more or less at the same time, is that they give off some of what's in them. If they are whole, they don't absorb it a second time. So there will be a big difference whether they're being pickled together or they're being pickled one after the other. This is the whole daf today. If you put non-kosher fish first, so it absorbed the brine, it expelled in the brine, then you put in a kosher fish. Even if the kosher fish is whole, even if the olive is whole, it's going to absorb. It's absorbing already the tam of something not kosher. It's going to be a problem. Or truma, a non-kohen cannot eat it. But if you put it at the same time, it absorbs, expels. If it's whole, it doesn't absorb again. Gavaldik. And I know there's a lot of avodas Hashem that we can learn from that, about how a whole person doesn't absorb that much from their environment. Or in the opposite, in the good side, that a person who's crushed, who's humbled, is able to absorb good things a lot more. You don't absorb once and you're done. You know, you absorb, you share, but you are continuously absorbing. Okay. Atkan, the words of introduction. And now let's go into this daf. It says in Pirkei Avos, Doctor, hafachba v'hafachba, which means turn the Torah over, the choylava, because everything is in it. So for the people here that are into food cooking and they are chefs, even on that level, there's a lot to be learned from how things work over here. Okay, says the Mishnah. Zeise chulin, first topic will be the olives. So you have chulin olives, shekivashan. Now, I want to tell you right now that you have the Rosh and other Rishonim that their girsa in the Mishnah is sheshelakon. In the Bavli, either we just learned this in the Rambam or I learned this elsewhere, that shelika in the Bavli means overcooking. Remember this. In the Yerushalmi, shelika means cooking for a very small amount of time. The same word is used in the opposite direction. If the girsa is shelakan, we're not going to have the problem that I spoke out in the introduction, which is, since kavush kemevushal, if the olives would have been cooked together, vadai, the chulin olives would be prohibited to a non-kohen, no matter how the olives are, whether they're open, whether they're broken. You cook two items together, they exchange and they absorb the juices one from the other. Vadai. We're speaking about kavashan, if the girs is kavashan. So if shalika makes sense, you cooked it a little bit. If it's shekavashan, and that's the way we're going to learn it. So even though, yes, kavush kemevushal, and now we're going to learn exceptions. It's not legamre like mavushal. Because here we're going to differentiate if it was done when they say truma. So says the Mishnah the following. Listen, guys. If pitsuye chulin, the word pitsuye means wounded. In the context of olives, it means that the olives were crushed prior to them being put into the pickling barrel. On what level, I don't know, but they're open. An open olive, both will expel and absorb. Easier. More. So if the ikir here is the chulin one being pitsuye, that's the ikir. If the chulin one is already crushed together with crushed truma, you can already know the answer. The answer will be that no, that a non-kohen won't be able to eat it. Or pitsuye chulin, even if the truma olives are shlemim, are whole, because like I mentioned, even whole olives, the Gemara is going to say this clearly. You put it into pickling juice, it absorbs, then it gives out. Even though it's whole, somehow the juices ooze out from somewhere. So there's going to be from the shleimei truma some of its taste in the pickling juice. Oibe mei truma means first you put the truma olives in the barrel, then you remove the truma olives. But the brine is there. The brine already has in it some from the truma olives. And again, and in this, you put pitsuye chulin. So in all of these cases, says the Mishnah, asur, gavaldik. In other words, the isur is not only because they were pickled together. Doesn't make a difference. The problem is that the taste from the truma olives, even though they have the same taste of the chulin olives, we still consider that taste to be significant. And in our case, therefore, problematic. Truma, tam ki ikar. And it went into it. But all of the above is because the chulin olives were pitsuye. They were crushed. They were wounded. But if the chulin olives were whole, now, the Mishnah says they were put into pitsuye truma. Okay? And let's go see, look inside the Marafulda. The word in pitsuye truma, the Marafulda says, even if pitsuye truma, that means that really what the Mishnah is telling you is that if the olives that are chulin were whole and they were put in at the same time with the truma olives, whether the truma olives were shlemim, or even if they were pitsuyim, because if they are crushed, they're going to expel a bit more. Seder, doesn't matter. The shleimei chulin won't absorb, even though when you put it into the barrel, the first thing everything does is it absorbs. But when it absorbed initially, there wasn't of the taste of the truma in the brine, because you put them in together. So then we say muter gavaldik.
Right, the crushed, the olives are whole. You're saying because they are whole, they're not going to absorb any flavor?
So again, Kavan, I'm giving you a heads up. The Gemara says that the pickling juice has an effect even on whole olives for them to both absorb and for them to expel. But since the case of the Mishnah, where it's mutter, is where you put the truma olives and the chulin olives in together, and the pickling juice never had prior to it truma olives, what will happen is the first reaction that olives have with this type of pickling brine is that they absorb. First thing they absorb together. So nothing happened yet because it absorbed, even though there's truma olives, the truma olives didn't expel anything yet. Then they both expel. The whole ones are done. They're saturated. The crushed ones, they absorb, they expel, they absorb, and they expel. Keeps on going back and forth. So if the chulin olives are pitsuye, then you won't be allowed to eat it. If the chulin olives are shlemim, then a non-kohen will be allowed to eat it. Okay. Oh, and based on what we just said, it comes out that if the shlemei chulin were put into Mei Truma, they will also be prohibited, Kevan. Even though in the Mishnah it's not clear, the Gemara is going to clarify it, because we know that even though they are whole, they do absorb. The only reason why it's permitted is because when it's permitted, when prior to putting in the chulin olives, there wasn't any Truma olives. They were put in together. Okay.
The Mishnah doesn't talk about whole and whole. Would that be fine also?
That's why I refer to the Marav Fulda. The Marav Fulda says that when it says Shlei Mechulin, right, the Chiddush, the Heter, in Petsuye Truma means afilu in Petsuye Truma. Vadai, if the Truma are Shleimim, then there is less exchange between the Truma and the juices. Even though they are Petsuye, that means that the Truma olives are continuously absorbing and expelling and absorbing and expelling. The Shleimim only absorbed once. And when they absorbed, there wasn't a problem yet. Now it's amazing. They're laying there together. You rinse it off and you go eat it. Okay. Says the Gemara, Aman Abiyayna. Zoi soy meres. What we learn from the Mishnah is that's what I just mentioned. Tsuyim, that when olives are crushed, the first thing that happens is boiling, absorbed. The next thing that happens, now for how long, I don't know. Let's say for 30 seconds, for 10 seconds, there's a taking in, breathing in, upalten, and they expel, they secrete. If they are crushed, then it keeps on going. But in contrast, shleimin, if the olives are whole, don't misunderstand the Mishnah to say kevan, that whole olives don't absorb at all. That's not true. If whole olives of chulin are put into brine that was previously used for truma olives, it will be prohibited. So what's the difference? They are boiling, and then they are poilten, but that's it. V'oiden boiling, and look inside the Rashirilio, the left column, 4 lines from the top. Shleimin, boiling, upoilten, v'shuveina boiling. First of all, the hachazinon, the first thing that Rashirilio is approaching this, not by other ways of there's some sort of contradiction in the Mishnah. From the reality, he says if you put whole olives in pickling salt water, when you're going to eat it, you're going to taste salt in it. In other words, you can't say that's Kevan, that's the way he understood the Zoy Soy Meres. Like what led him to it? There are different ways. The Rashi Elio is saying the Hachazinon that afilu shleimim heim the bali tam hamelach. We know that, and there's another rule that anything that is able to absorb is able to secrete. Even though I want you to know that in the reality, think about liquid in a cup, and we have this in other contexts in Tumantara and Kalim. Right? When it comes to a hole that is perforated, when does the keli become nullified as a keli? So we have, I know there's moitzer rimoin, but you have many shiurim. Remember that there are some shiurim where will water go in or will water go out? Just know about it, that for water to go out of a cup, you need the smallest hole. For water to be able to go in, you need a larger, which means that if there is a way for something to be absorbed, vadai, through that, something can be secreted. So that's what the Rashirilio is saying. When you put olives in any brine, forget about chulin. If it's salty, the olives will become salty, which means that whole olives absorb. If they absorb, they for sure secrete. So then we got a problem. So how do you explain the Mishnah? That's the Zoy Soy Meres. Yeah. Shleimim are boiling, and then they are polten. Now it's happening at the same time. The key is v'oideinam boilim. That's the Chiddush. And again, I think the Musar Haskel for us guys is that we're living in a society that a lot in our society is very not healthy to absorb. We all absorb. But there's a limit. We limit it. So we absorb a little bit. And the ideal is for us to share the good that's being channeled through us. And if we're shalemim, we won't be boilim anymore.
If it's secreted, Takam, you can't absorb again.
What was that?
Okay, if it's absorbed, It's secreted it out. Why can't it absorb again?
It just doesn't happen that way. Rabbi Jack is bringing with people that are not frum yet. What happens? You give out, you channel Kedusha, and you don't absorb what doesn't belong. That's how it works. Our avoid is to remain shalom, to remain tamim. Okay. Now we're taking a step back. The step back is what's the whole issue of tam? See, everything we learned until now, Aviv, you're getting a good intro to Smicha. In this chapter, right, the onion, the began with the onion and the lentils. We explained, why did we even speak about the ratio of 1 and 60? Is because we're speaking about min b'she'enoi minoi. Min b'she'enoi minoi, when you have two items that are different, each one has a differentiated taste. So therefore, the taste of one is going to go into the other. It's going to be discernible. Elama, we had a concept, and we paskan like Rab Shimon, that if the taste that is being shared is detrimental, not discernible, it's always discernible. Discernible and detrimental, according to Rab Shimon, it's not going to create a halachic problem, right? Nois and tam lipgam, according to Rab Shimon, is mutter. Here we're speaking about min b'minoi. Min b'minoi, you're not even going to discern the taste. Olives and olives. So Hada Amra, says the Gemara, that when the tam is loy l'shvach v'loy lipgam, and one might have argued that since it's like and like, so the taste is not discernible, maybe it should be mutter. Hada Amra, no. You see clearly that even though, it's asur. And by the way, the same thing will be with basar nevela, basar shchuta. You know, we're speaking about truma, but the same guy, min b'minoi. We're not talking about the ikir and the bittel for the ikir. We're speaking about the tam. I want to add something very important, which is that Rabbi Yehuda holds, the Tana Rabbi Yehuda holds, min b'minoi is never batal. We're going to get to that. It's not negate to this at all, and I'll explain to you why in a moment. Okay, we're speaking about the tam, and the tam is halachically significant, and it creates a problem. Says the Gemara. Now the Gemara makes a statement that makes absolutely no sense. Says the Gemara is going to right away challenge itself. Our Mishnah follows Rab Shimon. The premise of the statement is that the Gemara is equating neutral flavor with detrimental flavor. That's the premise. The problem with that premise is that we just learned it. We're not confused yet. Rav Meir is the one that says nois and tam lifgam is usher. Let's go with Rabbi Yochanan's understanding. Rab Shimon is the one that says, like whom we paskin, nois and tam lifgam is mutter. So the Gemara should have says masnis and Rav Meir. But the Gemara says no, that our Mishnah follows Rab Shimon. Rab Shimon Amar nois and tam lifgam is usher. And all of this is based on a premise that we equate detrimental flavor with neutral flavor. The Gemara is going to say, no. Frek the Gemara on itself. No, someone made that statement, but it was completely misunderstood. For Rab Shimon, Rab Shimon is the one that says, Nois and Tam Lavgam is mutter and a chanami. So therefore, what we are not equating detrimental flavor and neutral flavor. We're not doing that. We are speaking about the other issue that we mentioned. It doesn't impart any discernible flavor. Who told you it's a problem? Detrimental flavor, taka is not a problem, according to Rab Shimon. Neutral flavor, even though it's not shvach, is a problem if it's discernible. Problem olives and olives, one might have argued it's bechlal not a problem because it's not discernible. There is another Rab Shimon that we'll quote in a moment that we're going to actually have soon here in Masechta Trumos, from where we see that even though the taste is not discernible, it's significant. Ubemela, it's going to be asur. So answers the Gemara, no. The Rab Shimon, when we said masnis and the Rab Shimon, it's not the Rab Shimon that says nois and tam lavgam asur. No, it's not what we meant. Actually, we're going to have it in 2 days. We're going to have it on Daf Tzadik Vav. Yeah. I know, but he said Rab Shimon is not asur. So the Rab Shimon Oimar, where do we have a similar concept? I'll tell you, a Mishnah, Kruv shel shikya. Now, I want to say it like this. Items that grow in an irrigated field means a field that doesn't get enough natural rainwater for it to grow whatever it's growing, for which you have to have human irrigation. I know you would think, well, if there's human irrigation, it's going to be saturated with water. That's not the way it works. When we irrigate it, we give what's needed but we don't give more than what's needed, which would mean the case of the Mishnah is about a kruv, about a cabbage. A cabbage that grew in a field that needed human irrigation is going to be drier than a cabbage that grew from a field that was living off rainwater. And therefore, if a cabbage from this field and a cabbage of that field was put together, the cabbage from the irrigated field that's dry, yearning for water, will absorb the moisture from the cabbage that grew in a naturally irrigated field. That's the mitzias. So says the Mishnah, Kruv shel shikya, shesh shalaka. In the Yerushalmi, shalaka doesn't mean overcooking. It means partial cooking. But even though it's partial cooking, there's enough heat to cause the flavor to both be imparted and for it to be absorbed. If it was cooked im kruv shel baal, now obviously the issue must be that the cabbage of the irrigated field was chulin, must be the case. The cabbage that grew in the non-irrigated field, which is a cabbage that has more moisture, so it's prone more to impart, less to absorb, is truma. If they were partially cooked together, says Rab Shimon that you will not be allowed to eat, a non-kohen will not be allowed to eat the cabbage from the irrigated field.
If it was reversed, if the situation was reversed.
Then we say that this partial cooking, proper cooking makes no difference. The flavors go back and forth. But since it was only partial cooking, it's only in that direction. But hold on, Kevin. The point we see from over there is cabbage and cabbage have the same taste. We're not talking about someone that doesn't know which cabbage is which. That is something that we learned earlier in the Masechta. And a chanami. And over there, if it got mixed in, and if you don't have the rabbinic ratio of 100 to 1, then no one can eat. Everything is called meduma. We're not talking about that. We're talking about that you know which one is truma, which one is chulin. You know that. The only issue is tam. Now, if neutral taste would be insignificant, then there wouldn't be a problem. Even though the fact that the cabbage came from the irrigated field and therefore it lacks moisture, even though the cooking was very weak, partial, it absorbs. Is araya? That's the Rab Shimon. Beautiful. Shubay leya. Okay. In other words, neutral flavor is not equated with detrimental flavor, and that's very important. Going back to what we learned a few days ago, because nois and tam lev gam, we paskin b'di'evid, we paskin like Rab Shimon, but that's only if it's lipgam. I'm going back to min b'she'enoi minoi. There are many times that things are together, whether through cooking, whether through soaking, whether through moileach, meluach, kiroi. There is an exchange of flavors. Many times, if you'll ask a chef, he'll say, well, it's not l'shvach, it's not l'fgam. That's what we're learning right now. Not l'shvach, not l'fgam. Even Rab Shimon, who's mekel by nois and tam l'fgam, will not be mekel. It's not only if it's l'shvach. This is extremely important. And now, turning to the Tzadik Daled on the days, and the Ingen le'Ingen ba'isa Ingen. Now we're going to have the same topic. Really, this topic, before we spoke about Truma and Chulin, now we're going to speak about Dag Tamei, just to read the first line. Shekavashay, let's go with the gears again, that we're speaking about pickling, Im Dag Tahar. Now, really, there are two issues involved here. Only one is being addressed in the Mishnah, and the Gemara will address something that everyone thinks about. The Gemara will address the status of the fish. The Mishnah is not talking about the status of the fish. The Mishnah simply wants to speak about the status of the brine. We just established in the previous Mishnah that we learned today that even if things are whole, and yes, we are equating whole fish and cut up fish, even though it's whole, when you put an item in pickled juices and brine, they will first absorb and then they're going to expel. So when you put the dam tamei with dag tahar, both of them absorbed. So far, nothing happened negative. Now they both expelled. If we're going to focus on the brine, is the brine something that I'm allowed to use? It has in it the tam, the moisture from dag tamei. And the answer is yes, it has. Now, how much will be needed for it to be nullified? That will be the nakuda. There is some point that if the quantity of the dag tamei is so little, min b'minoi, even Rabbi Yehuda, and I want to add this, Even though you can say, one second, min b'minoi, who says there's ever bittul? According to the Tana Rabbi Yehuda, min b'minoi loy batel. So you should know that min b'minoi loy batel is only when we're speaking about a biblical prohibition. Like we mentioned by grasshoppers, that we'll see in a moment in the words of introduction. I should have mentioned it by fish. Juices that are secreted from a fish because they were put in a pickling barrel, biblically, are not problematic, even pure from a dak tameh. It's called zeya. The problem is rabbinic. Since the problem is only rabbinic, even the Tana Rabbi Yehuda that says that by a biblical prohibition, min b'mino iloi batel, will agree that at some point it's going to be nullified. What ratio was needed? And we're going to begin today, and we're going to, God willing, continue tomorrow. We're going to see, if you ever heard the expression, afilu echad be'elef loi batel, now you're going to see where it comes from. I remember, because people ask, why do we even mention this concept of echad be'elef, when really, just to know the rules, either beroiv, just to know, things are nullified either in its majority. We paskin now that when it comes to like and dislike, min b'she'ein or minoi, how much do you need ratio for the tam to be batel? 1 in 60. Then we learned by truma, min b'minoi, 1 in 100. We learned that by ardel and kilei akedem, it's 1 in 200. If you have that ratio, then it's nullified. Where do we even have echad be'elef? Here. It's amazing. And you'll see that the emes, it's not 1 in 1,000. It's 1 in 960. I'm so excited to learn this. I don't remember learning this, B'chla. We don't have this in the Rambam because we don't paskin like this opinion. But that's where the lashon. So when Chazal said echad be'elef, is because there is, according to some Tanoim, a case, our case, where you have to have a ratio of 1 in 960, but then it's going to be nullified. So we rounded off echad be'elef. Here we go. Dam tamisha kvashim daktar. The Mishnah is not talking about the fish. Remember that the fish is something else. We're speaking about the brine. Says the Mishnah, take out the vav, kol godov. Shumachzik sosayim. If the barrel can hold 2 saw, we're gonna expound on this tomorrow. I want you to know that normally aviv is saw. Is that a volume measure or a weight measure? No, saw is normally a volume measure. I just want to make it clear, this is tomorrow's Gemara, that here it must mean a weight measure. Why am I saying that? Because the Mishnah is saying that if you have, the barrel has the size of 2 saw. Im yesh boy mishkal, if in it you have the weight, we're speaking about how much does the non-fish weigh. And we're going on the presumption that the juice that leaves the non-kosher fish has the same weight of the fish itself. How can that be? I don't know. So if the non-kosher fish has the weight of 10 Judean zuzin, which are 5 galil soloyim, just to know, the coin in the Galil weighs half of the coin in Yehuda. Does it buy only half? Ich weiß nicht. Mistama. But the different sizes, so it's the same thing. So either you're going to use the 5 sloim in Galil, or you're going to use 10, the opposite, guys. If 5 in Galil, right, 5, half, it's double the size. The Galil coins will double the size. Judean coins were half the size. So it's the same share. So if it's 10 weight coin in 2 saw, the Gemara is going to say we don't mix together weight and volume. The Gemara tomorrow is going to give you the cheshbon. We're going to go through the numbers tomorrow. That the 2 saw really equates to a certain amount of weight, and the proportion between 10 zuz of your Judean coins in the weight of 2 saw is 1 in 960. That's the Tanakama. If you have that, then tziroi asur. Imagine. If the ratio is a drop less than that, once it's above the 1 in 960, like it's 1 in 59, you have to 1 in 60. If it's 1 in 960, then the brine, the content, the taste of the non-kosher in the brine is not nullified. The moment the ratio is that there is a bit less of the non-kosher, then it's batel. Then you can have the brine. That's the most stringent opinion. In other words, you need to have almost 1,000. It's 1,000. Really, 1 in 961 will be good. So we just round it off. Rabbi Yehuda, the Tana Rabbi Yehuda says, like we mentioned, again, even though Rabbi Yehuda normally holds min b'mino, will never be batal, since the juice that is extracted from a fish through pickling, biblically, is permitted, even if it comes from a non-kosher fish, prohibited rabbinically, since it's only an Isur Midrabanan, even Rabbi Yehuda will hold that at some point, min b'minoi will be batal. It's min b'minoi. It's seed and seed. By the way, notice we don't say kosher fish, non-kosher fish, min b'she'en minoi. We don't say that. It's called min b'minoi. But he holds that it's a revius b'sosayim. A revius b'sosayim, we'll see tomorrow in the Gemara, is 1 in 192. Even 1 in 192 will not be nullified. But the moment it's less than that, then it will be nullified. And the third opinion in the Tana and the Mishnah, Rabbi Yasa Omer, Echad Mishisha Asr Boy, 1 in 16. 1 in 16 will not be nullified. The moment the ratio is less, then it will be nullified. No, it's the most lenient opinion for Bittul is Rabbi Yasa. So here we have Shurim that we never have, guys. And we just said, Roiv, Shishim, Meya, Masayim, now you're having a share of Echad Be'elef. I'm using the word because it's borrowed from here, the Echad Be'elef, or 1 in 192, or our 16th. Amazing. Okay. So now that we went through kosher and non-kosher, what's the din of the fish? Let's leave it for the Gemara. But let's go into the next case in the Mishnah. Grasshoppers and grasshoppers. Tasty. So chagavim temeim, shenichbeshu im chagavim tohirim. And here again, my friends, the juices that are secreted from temeim grasshoppers, mido oiraisa, are mutir. It's considered zeya ba'alma. It might be prohibited rabbinically. Here we'll already see a machlekes tanoim. But since it's only an isur midrabanan, again, the bittul is much easier. So says the Mishnah that if they were done together, the juices won't be prohibited. Leipaslu es tzidam. What does that mean it won't be prohibited? Since there is a little bit of kosher juice, of juice from a kosher grasshopper, that nullifies it. Which would mean that if you didn't do it together, if you only had chagavim tameim, then rabbinically the juices would be prohibited. Elama, for bittul, minimum needed. A drop of good makes everything good. That's the Tanakama, who's more machmir. Heyed Rab Tzaddik testified that when it came to tzir shel chagavim tameim, even if the tzir, which is the name of the juice, we're speaking about juice that's not extracted by squeezing. We're speaking about juices that come out of the grasshopper because you put it in salt water. It's what the pickling does. That which it takes from, that which it provokes a secretion is considered insignificant to the point that even midrabanan it's not asur, without any mixing with tzir of chagavim tohirim. That's the second opinion. Al tzir chagavim tameim shutar, and we're going to have a lot more in the Gemara. But let's see. Let's go to the end of the Amid. So says the Gemara that the Mishnah only spoke about the tzir in the ratio. So we spoke about the 3 levels, 3 opinions of how much is needed for bittul. What about the fish? Can you eat the fish? So Tanei, Rabbi Yehuda, Bar Pazi, the Bar Deloya. We're going to go with those who say Bar Deloya was the name of a Tana, could be. In other words, we're quoting a Braisa in the name of Bar Deloya. That Dak Tohar, if, again, the Dak Tohar is tuffle, is unsalted, and it was pickled together with a normal dag, tamei, moliach, we're going to say that the unsalted fish will absorb the brine secreted by the non-kosher fish, and it's going to be asur. Now, we're not giving any ratios. We're saying the fish remains asur. Hold on. We have a braisa that says the opposite. That all you need to do is to rinse it off. Medicha yumuter. Okay. The Havamina is that both braises are speaking about whole fish. And then the understanding of the Tana Rab Chia will be that whole fish, because of their whole, I'm not going to say wholesomeness because the Gabi will comment that you can't say wholesomeness on a fish. But because of them being whole, they don't absorb. But we already learned on Amud Aleph that it's not true, that everything absorbs. Oh, So how do you reconcile that? So the Gemara says the following: like this. The second brayso, the Tana Rab Chia says mutter. It's when bishekavashan shtem ka'achas, like we learned in Amud Aleph. That means you put kosher fish and non-kosher fish together. Like we mentioned, when you put any product in pickling juices, the first thing that happens is absorbs. Second thing that happens is they secrete. The problem will only begin because the non-kosher secreted. But since the kosher fish is whole, that's the end of the exchange. It doesn't reabsorb again. Nigmar. So that's why in that case it's going to be mutter. Man, the Amar Aser, the Bryce in the name of Bar Deloya was Bishikavashan Za'achar Zeh, meaning the non-kosher fish was placed first. I don't know for how many seconds, how many minutes, which means that when you placed the kosher whole fish inside the barrel, there was already the tam, there was already the tzir of the non-kosher fish in the pickling juice. The first thing that happens is it absorbs. Boom. So now it absorbed non-kosher. And Teida Lochashu Kain, because since we learned in the previous Mishnah, Oy bimei truma asur, yes, we are equating whole olives and whole fish. And so the Mishnah said before, the first Mishnah we learned today is that if you put the way we learned the Mishnah, whole chulin olives, not only crushed, if you put them into mei truma, which means into liquids, into juices that previously had in it truma olives, even though the olives of chulin are shalemim, they will be usher to a non-kohen. In other words, that's this proof that whole doesn't mean it doesn't absorb. It does mean it only absorbs once. I mean, so must be. Why? Because it was done before. So, we had today's shir. And what would happen? I just want to clarify one thing. What would happen if the ratio, let's go to the Tanakama, that's batal echad be'elef, or really batal. It's funny how we use the numbers. That if it's 1 in 960, it's not batal, but that's the end of the line where it's a problem. If it was put 1 in 961, since the tzir is not going to be a problem, neither will the fish. It goes together. The point that the Gemara is discussing is that the Mishnah only spoke about the brine. We already learned in the previous Mishnah that just because something is whole doesn't mean it doesn't absorb. But we have the klal from the previous Mishnah, whether they were put together, whether they were put zachar zeh. Simultaneous is lesser of a problem, because by the time it's absorbing, which is when you put it in, it's not like the non-kosher gives out and the kosher fish takes in. It doesn't work that way. Everyone absorbs and then everyone secretes. And then, since it's whole, that cycle doesn't continue. Gavaldik.